Stephanie. So we're going to go ahead with it. Yeah, sorry. We may be joined by another student in a little bit, but there's Stephanie right there. She's in her car going to her job, but she has. She's dedicated. She has her speech ready, and we're all excited to go. Okay. So go ahead with your first speech, and Stephanie will have her speech, and then we can kind of go from there.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Yeah, we've got at least 3 speeches, so it might feel a little imbalanced, but we're going to go for it.
Okay, good. No problem. Go ahead.
You can start first.
Hi, I'm Daisy. So the question we're answering today is, do gun laws prevent violence? Gun-related violence threatens our most important right, the right to life. In the US, there have been 386 school shootings since the Columbine shooting in 1999, which has meant that more than 356,000 students have experienced gun violence whilst at school. Furthermore, 39,000 people are killed with guns each year, with 360 people shot every single day. This is more than 5 times the number of people killed per year in the UK. Of those 13,900 people killed by guns in the US, 491 are teens and 85 are children. Whilst I understand that it's embedded within the US Constitution that the right to bear arms, this is people's lives and this should not be taken for granted. If all guns are removed, then it removes most of the need for them, which will ultimately save more lives. There are, in seven US states have completely banned any open carry activity. 8 states need to register their right to own a gun. That is 15 out of 50 states that require proper regulation for guns. That is an obscene amount considering how many people are killed by guns each year. The idea that gun laws prevent violence is not necessarily true. For example, in France, as I'm sure you are aware, there is so much violence going on at the minute and protests due to someone being shot by police. And I mean, in the UK, our police don't have guns. And while some may argue that this means that they are lesser protected, there are other options. If guns were banned or properly regulated for everyone, then it would be safer for everyone. And in 2018, the idea that self-defense is a key reason to have guns doesn't necessarily stand, as in 2018, there were 230 justifiable homicides, which, self-defense, compared with 8,275 criminal gun homicides. That's a 1:36 ratio. So the idea that self-defense and there's a need for self-defense for guns doesn't really stand, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, can we, Stephanie, do you have any questions of the people there?
No, absolutely not. You did an amazing job.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll do our side, have our speech. Stephanie, you ready?
Okay, if I lag out or anything, just let me know.
Okay.
So good morning. My name is Stephanie Obregon, and I'm here to explain to you the first point, which is why gun violence can be solved constitutionally. I will bring up 3 points. 1, taking away the Second Amendment won't stop the problem. 2, if people are used to the protection of a gun, they aren't going to give it up. 3, everyone does things illegally, no matter how hard you try to stop it. If there's a will, there's a way. As we all know, the Second Amendment guarantees the right to keep and bear arms. It has been a really long time since the Constitution was written and signed, and ever since then, society followed the rules of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Included in the Bill of Rights is obviously the Second Amendment. 1, when you have over 333 million guns in the United States, it's going to be really difficult to remove them. And since the Constitution gives you the right to own guns, if you try to take that away from people, everyone's just going to rebel and gun violence is just going to get worse. Even by removing the right to bear arms, gun violence, again, won't stop. Not only that, but the process of getting an amendment removed isn't a fun one. 2, when it's a good law, everyone will follow. Many people own a gun to protect themselves, and a gun is the best way to do that. If people are used to having a gun, they're going to keep it that way, and they want to keep their loved ones safe. There is no way that they're going to give up that protection just because they believe that there's gun violence. When you're used to that protection, you're not going to imagine someone's life without it. You know, if there's an intruder or someone trying to hurt you, you can fall back to quote unquote save your life. In the end, people do things illegally, no matter if you get rid of the Second Amendment or take all the guns away in the United States. Those who want it, get it. There's a will, there's a way. You can enforce it, but for so long, you see people carrying guns in their glove box, and you will see people go to ridiculous measures to have it in their hands. In conclusion, no matter what you do, constitutionally, gun violence unfortunately can't be solved. We are basically stuck here. We have a right to have and own a gun. You do not have to have a gun, but if you take away the rights, you take away all the rights. Do laws protect people? Many people, especially our opponents. However, don't we already have laws against crime? Do we already have laws against murder? Do we not already have laws against guns already? Yes, yes, and yes. Then in direct response to our opponents, laws have not settled this question, have they? No, they haven't. Therefore, if they have not, our opponents could be wrong to call for more laws, correct? Thank you so much for your time, and I hope I got my point across.
Trudy, do y'all have any questions for Stephanie?
Yeah, we've got a number of questions, and we've also got another speech as well, haven't we? Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, yeah. In reference to your comments about self-defense, I'm just wondering how you would argue that you could protect yourself against a shooter when, if guns were illegal in the first place, you wouldn't have to protect yourself against a shooter. And in no situation has someone ever defended themselves with a gun against a gun and been successful and come out unharmed. Guns in themselves aren't a safe self-defense tool, and there will always be safer alternatives. And to dismiss them and to choose a firearm that dominates the amount of deaths that you have per year simply doesn't seem logical.
So to answer your question, people always fall back on guns because you don't see people pulling out a knife to a gunfight. I don't believe that there's safer measures because it's something that's big. Many people, even if you're weak, you could fall back on it. I think you mentioned that there's other forms of defense and why would you have a gun? But when you're here and you have that in your possession, you feel like you could do anything. If you want to protect yourself and the people you love, you'll do anything. Even if you haven't ever handled a gun before, you know that you have that to protect yourself. I don't know if that answered your question.
I do understand what you're saying, in that guns feel to a lot of people as the safest form of protection, as they have been used for the longest time. But I think arguably the reason why they feel the safest is because people are also guaranteed, if two people walk into a fight with a gun, not everyone is leaving that fight. Guns are guaranteed to cause far more harm than any other firearm, which arguably is the reason why people feel so safe with them, but it's also the reason why they are so dangerous. They are going to be the downfall of society if we continue like this, because ultimately you cannot protect yourself from a gun with a gun. You cannot stop a bullet with a gun. It simply isn't logical, and it simply isn't effective.
I completely hear what you're saying, but if you know how to use a gun properly, like many people do, you know that you'll make it out safely because other people just have it, and you can't wait for the cops to show when you have a gun in your possession, you're not going to let an intruder just come in and you not go down without a fight.
You can join in as well. I mean, you can and that includes everybody at the back. Everybody can join in if you've got something to contribute.
Yes, I do understand that, but once again, the point that we are trying to confirm is that you may be able to protect yourself with a gun, but what you're protecting yourself from is a gun. If the person that you're going into a fight with did not have that gun, then who would be in danger?
Also, 1 million violent crimes involve guns each year, whereas victims only use guns in self-defense 60,000 to 120,000 times, which I think shows that like the true reason a lot of Americans do use guns differs to like the excuse of self-defense against not only like intruders, but also some people against like bears and like animals.
So what specifically is your question?
I don't think necessarily it was a question, but I think what we are just curious about is how the logic stands that you can justify owning a gun with self-defense when only about 60,000 of the million crimes per year involving guns are of self-defense, and how after so many years of gun violence and after so many years of just deaths upon deaths, how you can choose to still justify it with the word self-defense, because simply that is just not the truth.
Well, if you take the US Constitution into consideration, it tells you you have the right to bear and keep arms. So you're saying that guns aren't something that you'd like to use and that there's safer alternatives. But if you think about it, you are given the right to have one. So why wouldn't you if you know that it's something that you could again fall back on?
I understand the logic of falling back on the Second Amendment within the Constitution, but I think arguably falling back on the Constitution is no longer a viable option for Americans. I mean, it was written by your founding fathers in a time where the world as you know it is not at all as it is now. And to argue that what is written by people in a different time should still be followed doesn't necessarily coincide and doesn't necessarily link to the world that you're living in today, because the founding fathers weren't dealing with the amount of police brutality or the amount of school shootings, and therefore to say that they allowed you to do that simply doesn't necessarily coincide with the way that you are living today.
So what I'm hearing is that you're saying that the US Constitution is no longer important because we live in we're living in a whole different way. But if you look back to the Magna Carta, that's not what happened. People look back to it. Everyone has followed the US Constitution for so long, people are not just going to go against it.
I do understand that, but I do understand
Sorry,
that, but I will. I do understand that, but I will say that comparing the Magna Carta to the US Constitution isn't necessarily a fair comparison. The Constitution is pretty much what American politics is based off of, and it's what a lot of Americans choose to live their life based off of, and it's what the laws of states are based off of, whereas the Magna Carta is only a small piece of UK history.
In the United States, we find the US Constitution very important, and it's the laws of our land. It's the English common law, like we all follow it. So I don't think it'd be right to go against it. And so does everyone else in the United States.
So obviously your constitution was in 1787, which is hundreds of years ago, and the idea that, I know, as you said, that these laws and these policies that have been followed for such a long time would be so incredibly difficult to go against it. The idea that you are still following these things that were written hundreds of years ago, sort of, and there's only been 26 amendments since then, 27, sorry, shows that, whilst of course I do understand that these laws and these policies and sort of the whole basis and the whole foundation of the way of life in America I really do think that it's sort of almost incomprehensible, the idea that you're still sort of, you know, basing your whole life based off something that was written that long ago. And of course, you know, again, as I've said, I do understand the fact that guns caused so many issues across the world, not just in America, but the fact that America is so sort of hung up on guns. It's sort of the main part that people take from the Constitution. I mean, there are so many examples where guns can, you know, be taken away. I mean, you got the example of in Northern Ireland, guns were so prominent in Northern Ireland, and you know, after the Good Friday Agreement, guns were successfully, you know, regulated and removed. And that, yes, although it may take a while, it's still possible and it can still happen. And the idea that as well, you know, you were saying about if there's a will, there's a way. The idea that if you remove the right to guns, there would be rebellion. Does that not sort of suggest that there's potentially a weak law enforcement, a weak idea of regulation?
I said there's a will. If there's a will, there's a way. And you're trying to go towards another direction. But like I said, I'm pretty sure everywhere in the world has laws. You always fall back on them. If you don't, then there's just violence.
Now it's sugar free.
So
Absolutely, sorry, Carrie.
I'm just saying, the fact that you're trying to go back, you can't go back and change that. It already happened. You can't take away something from the whole United States just because of one singular amendment.
You do say that, but for example, slavery wasn't ended with the Constitution. Things are, you know, it's possible to change things, as there have been so many amendments. It's possible to change things and talk about things like that. I mean, you've got the example of Roe v. Wade as well with the abortion laws and things like that. And obviously Roe v. Wade was sort of abolished as well. There are so many examples where, even though it may take time and may be difficult because it is so embedded within the Constitution and within your way of life, it's still possible to happen. And, you know, if not, okay, if we're not going to ban them, I think stronger regulation is definitely something that can be discussed, because, you know, if we take away all purposeful gun shootings and everything there, 37% on average of gunshot injuries in America are a result of accidental shootings. Now, if we don't talk about, you know, the fact that because of them not being regulated properly and people not being investigated properly, I think people really should, you know, have more investigation behind when they're allowed to get a gun as well.
Well, I remember that you just said that Roe versus Wade was constitutional, but to get back to your point, Roe versus Wade was not constitutional, and you just proved my point.
I think that's more of an interpretation of the Constitution. The Constitution reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right to the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, of course, that's up to interpretation, and, you know, the judiciary is absolutely what interprets that. And I think that because, again, it's so embedded in the Constitution and within your way of life, that's just because that's what people are used to hearing. I mean, there are so many people that have spoken about and spoken up against guns, and I think that there are so many examples where, I mean, I could name 3 off the top of my head. You've got Columbine, Sandy Hook, you've got the Buffalo shooting. There's so many examples of completely preventable things that have happened that could so easily be changed and prevented in the future.
Like you mentioned, things could be prevented in the future, but don't you think if you take that right away to bear and keep arms, don't you think people will rebel? Don't you think that there would be more violence? There'd be so much more gun violence in America just because you got them angry. Everyone will rebel.
again, and I do understand what you're saying, but the idea of rebellion, does that surely not suggest a weak law enforcement? The fact that, you know, things can be changed and things have been changed. I'm sure there were plenty of people that weren't happy about the abolishment of slavery. I'm sure there was plenty of rebellion in that regard. And again, I mean, that, yeah, there was a civil war, and like there's so many things that, you know, can be changed. And again, yes, it may take time. Yes, people aren't going to be happy about it, but surely the fact that, you know, life above all else is the priority to protect. And again, the Constitution says the right to bear arms. What arms? Does that mean a handgun, a semi-automatic rifle? You know, I think it's the idea of what that means. Again, it's interpretation. There's so many different types of guns. I mean, people shouldn't be able to walk into a bank. I mean, we watched a documentary the other day. Granted, it is a few years old. The idea that you could just walk into a bank and, you know, you opened an account and you could get a gun. Like, you can't just walk into a shop and just say, yes, I want that gun. You can't just carry around a rifle with you. I don't understand in what world that would be acceptable.
Well, back then, the Second Amendment, one of the reasons why they did it originally was to protect slaves. They were given the right to bear and keep arms so that they could also protect themselves. So you bringing that up doesn't really change my mind.
I do understand what you're saying, but I would just like to quickly add that the idea that the Second Amendment was created for slaves is completely illogical, considering it affects the whole of the US population, and therefore saying that it was made to protect slaves is clearly illogical.
Sorry.
I'd be willing to bet that a large proportion of the people that benefited from the Second Amendment would have been people that were very angry about the abolition of slavery. And then we just had something else to say as well.
Dunblane in 1996, which happened in Scotland, was the last deadly mass school shooting in British history. And that was due to a man getting hold of handguns. And after that, our government came up with a stricter handgun control, like regulation, and gun homicides were almost eliminated completely. So if there was no rebellion here and like we managed to sort it, could the US government not at least attempt to?
And even if it might take a while, because it is, you know, a far more important part of the Constitution there than it ever was here, I do think that it's incredibly important to prioritize people's lives and people's livelihoods and, you know, everything about them. I mean, I can't remember how many people, I think it was nearly 400,000 people since Columbine affected, and this is children, school children who go to school to learn, a place that's supposed to be secure and safe. They've been affected by gun violence. It's just the fact that their whole lives can be sort of affected by one event that could be prevented is just, you know, crazy.
But their lives are protected by guns. They, like I mentioned before, that they could be safe, that they could live peacefully knowing that they have the right to own them and bear them.
One of the amendments also says that the state cannot, not sure any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. Guns prominently undermine the right to life based on how many people are killed by them each year.
And I would like to say as well, the logic that a child goes to school and feels protected by the presence of a gun is completely illogical. If someone that you knew walked into your school one day with a gun and you could not do anything about it, there's no way that you could feel confident and you could say to yourself, I know this person will not use this gun against me, because that is simply not the way that you cannot rely on humanity as much as I think a lot of the population of America who believe in gun rights seem to think. You cannot place all your trust in someone because you never know when they're going to switch. In examples of school shootings, it's never the person you expect. It's never the person that the school are keeping an eye on. But I ask you, if you genuinely want to feel protected against school shooters, would you want to arm children, or would that suddenly be too far? And then you'd want to keep guns around children, but then for some reason that wouldn't be too far.
I just think that the more laws that you add about it, the more restrictions that you try to put on it, that doesn't equal more safety. People will still find a way.
I understand what you're saying about crime rates, and I agree that no matter how many laws you put in place, there is still gun crime in the UK. But the difference is, if I want to go and I want to shoot someone, I can't go to a shop and I can't get a gun license and I can't go and shoot someone. The difference is that I will get arrested if I possess a gun, and the difference is that I can't walk into my school and I can't see a gun on my wall. I can't go to school and think this might be the place I get shot today, because I know that there are rules and regulations in place to prevent that.
And I also think as well, the what you were saying about sort of feeling protected. The idea that, there was sort of the idea that teachers should have guns. I think it's just incredible that the fact that students would, sort of be surrounded by something that causes violence. And, even if, yes, banning guns or more heavily regulating guns, there would still be gun violence. Of course there would. But the fact is that the numbers and the amount of people being affected by gun violence would dramatically decrease, which is surely better than the number of people that are being killed and affected by gun violence now.
So you previously mentioned that you wouldn't feel safe going into a school knowing that there could always be a school shooting. But in my school, there's always armed security that if no matter what happens at the end of the day, they will come and protect us with those guns.
I think we are ready to switch to our next speech, but I would just like to add on that the notion that you only feel safe because of the presence of armed security surely speaks volumes about how safe your school really is. The fact that I don't have to have security in my school, and I think, well, touch wood, to this day there has not been a school shooting at my school, because I know that if I come into school, I don't think there's guns in this building, there's people that have guns in this building, someone could bring a gun into this building. I don't need armed security in my school because I have confidence that there will not be need for them in my school.
And it's about access as well, because yes, those people, you have armed security at your school, but if someone really desperately wanted to get into your school, it's about access. I mean, there's guns there. The presence of guns, no matter who is holding them, who is in possession of that gun, it's about access. If someone has any sort of access to a gun, it dramatically increases the chance of gun violence.
I think we are ready to move on to our next speech from our next set of people now. So we'll move in and we'll get the next lot in.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'd also like to ask about the morals of owning a gun as well, knowing that in an American family, there are children going to be walking around. And this year, on May 17th, a little baby boy was shot by his older brother who found his father's handgun in his house. I just want to ask about the morals that you can leave a family that owns a gun and just know that there are risks that, like, a child is going to be shot and potentially killed.
Yeah, Stephanie had to leave, so if I guess I could try to answer the question because I think our other students haven't shown up yet. You're always going to have that potential, and the problem that underlines all this stuff is that a law in it takes the United States about 18 to 20 minutes for police to show up. And in case of an aggravated burglary, aggravated assault, aggravated this, you could be killed before the police ever even get a chance to get there. So our United States is so vast in area and in population and in attitudes from England, it's very difficult to try to see that. Now, in one case where somebody does that, there's people that leave medicine open for a child. And even then we have medicine proof bottles, you know, caps and stuff. People will take that and do that. There's cases of people taking, you know, liquids or whatever, drugs. We have a tremendous fentanyl problem here in the United States. People should know that fentanyl is very serious, very problem, but in the area where I live, I think 6 people have died this last year. 6 high school students have taken fentanyl and died. You can't, and there's a law against it, but you just cannot stop everything. Go ahead.
Can I ask, when you were talking about aggravated assaulters, what are they usually armed with?
Yeah, here in the States, it's going to be a gun. And guns are very easy to come by. And we have laws that you have to produce documentation to get a gun legally. But there's a lot of ways you can get guns. So when Stephanie mentioned there's 300 and something guns, that's 360 million guns that we know of. There's no telling how many illegal guns are around here as well. So it's a very it's a hard problem to do at this point. It'd been much easier to have the laws in place like you had in England back in the days when people didn't really have that many guns and you never developed that culture. Once this culture has developed, it's very hard to put a lid on it and try to go backwards with it.
Yeah.
In the UK, we regularly decommission knives to ensure the safety of our citizens. Don't you think that Americans could probably do the same thing with guns to ensure the safety and security of a US citizen?
Yeah, you have a very good point. I do not know because I've seen quite a few people been on subways, been attacked. I think there's been over there where they had those soapboxes and you can stand. I've heard of people being attacked there. And there's a lot of attacks on immigrants, I believe, in the UK, and they could stop on that. But again, you're looking at probably a population 1/5 in an area, oh my gosh, you know, 1/10 of the United States. So, and in England, you have a tremendous amount of CCTV cameras. You have some of the best security in the world as far as that. Here in the States, we don't have near that type of stuff. So if you're taking like in our area, my city, we have almost 3 million people. I don't think we have the CCTV cameras that you would have in any of the major cities. And we have still a lot of urban and suburban areas that have no cameras. So it'd be very difficult to try to compare the two.
Okay, one question. Do you own a gun, like, personally?
I don't. I myself, I don't necessarily believe that guns will give you security. I support the right of doing so. My son actively shoots. He has several guns. He lives in another city. He's visiting us right now. But yeah, I believe in the right to do it, but I personally do not do it myself.
Do
No,
you?
don't say that.
No, never mind. Just to reference back to a previous point, in Nottingham, where we are currently, there was a killing of 3 people, and it made international news due to the severity of the situation that was seen by the UK society as absolutely unacceptable. How many shootings and deaths make international news from gun violence in America?
Okay, I do not want to minimize this at all, but for the last maybe 10 years or so, we used to go to Chicago every summer. And when we went to Chicago, it would normally be like we'd get there on a Monday and they would have a the recap of the weekend. And every weekend we go up there for every year, there would be 20 or 30 kids that would be killed that weekend for gun violence. Just this morning, they shut down the interstate highway in Fort Worth for a shooting. We've had a tremendous amount of shootings here in the States, but we also have a much larger population and a much other issues and stuff like that as well. Chicago has the toughest gun laws in the world, but they will kill somewhere almost 2,000 to 3,000 people a year for gun violence. Some of our major cities have deteriorated to such that people are trying to take stuff in their own hands, and you know, you get that. So there's not a relationship here in our country between laws and effectiveness. Now there is in your country, because I think you put the laws in many years ago, and they never developed the amount of guns. You can't do and compare the two until we could eliminate much of the guns. And you just couldn't pick up guns. I think it was the Japanese, and I forget which Japanese general said that they never wanted to invade the United States because they thought when they invaded the United States, there would be people fighting, you know, for their homes with their own guns. And at that time in 1940, 41, 42, we had probably 1.5 to 2 times as many guns. Everybody had at least one gun in the house. So, you know, we don't have that average anymore, but we don't really know how much we have because there's so many illegal ones. We almost average about 1 gun per house. And that's where many people have more than 1 gun. Sorry.
We can, in a way, relate your gun laws to our knife crime. However, we do find stricter ways to deal with it. You say that Chicago has a very strict gun policy. However, you still allow guns there, and there are still quite a few casualties and deaths that result in those gun laws not being strict enough.
Right. Well, that goes back and actually proves my point. The only way you could really do this is to take away everybody's gun, and then that would go against the Constitution, and therefore we go back to your argument. You say 1787. Well, 1791 is when they wrote the Bill of Rights, and the Second Amendment was about right to bear arms. And we did have for militia at the time, but it's been interpreted in every case that we still have this right to bear arms. We don't have a right to bear a knife.
Okay, so you argue that guns are used for self-defense. However, a national random digit telephone survey showed that more often people use guns to intimidate as opposed to self-defense. If guns become illegal, then what do you need to defend yourself against?
Well, okay. One of the things that's really important to understand here is that people's feelings are very important. And there are, what you're not producing in these statistics is you're not producing the idea that how many of these crimes are committed with a gun. And of the ones that are committed with a gun, how many of those guns are illegal? So the high percentage of gun violence comes from illegal guns. People feel like they have the right to self-protection. They feel like the police may not get there. And that's why it ends up happening what happens. Go ahead.
Okay, so my point is that it may be more comforting to have some sort of weapon or self-defense object in the house, but it does more harm having one in your hands. People in your household have access to the weapons you keep, and sometimes it's not used for the right reasons. And I understand your point, but whoever you live with, if you have a gun, it causes more harm in general and puts people around you in a risk of danger. And going back to my point about family having access to your guns, another problem is the children you look after. There are an amount of places you can hide a gun, and there are a limit to a child's finding your weapon, but focusing on your children, they may be at risk of hurting themselves.
Yeah, you bring up very, very valid points. It's also interesting that parents don't put up medicines. They don't put up, they feed children. Let me ask you this question. Your parents buy you a cell phone, and the cell phone, you end up playing games or whatever on it. That could be very detrimental to your health as well. So there's a lot of things that we could blame parents on that aren't necessarily used for the right purpose. A gun should be locked away in a locked cabinet in which the parents have that to it, and that's a whole different deal. A gun safe. They're very popular here in the States. Go ahead.
Obviously, you were saying that a cell phone so as a mobile phone can be detrimental to your health. I don't think that anything's quite as detrimental to your health as being shot.
Well,
Yeah,
okay.
I just like to
Then you go back. That's a support for us again, because if you're that worried about being shot, then you would have a gun to stop the person from shooting you. So then you agree with us. So that's a very good point.
I would just like to ask, have you ever been in a situation where you've seen someone defend themselves from a bullet with a bullet? I understand the logic of you feel as though you could be defended with a gun, but all a gun has ever done in a situation of self-defense has raised the stakes, because it's gone from throwing a punch to shooting a bullet. It's gone from a bruise to a bullet hole. They're not comparable.
Oh, no. I think what you're doing is, in a very good way, you're trying to take away what we're looking at here. If you remember one of the beginning scenes of Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1981, you have Marion Rainsworth being taken away, and then Indiana Jones is chasing after her, and then all of a sudden he comes to a guy with a knife, and he's going like this with a knife, and Indiana Jones takes out the gun and shoots him. And then just the thing is, you don't want to take a knife to a gunfight. I think in this case here, the bullet's not going to stop the bullet. What you want to do is stop the person from shooting you in the first place. Okay, that's a first strike. And we could go back, and if you want to talk about nuclear bombs or talk about anything else, the first strike is going to be more powerful, and that's where you're going to stop. So again, what you're telling me is that you are using logic to actually help us out by saying that you need to have a first strike, and the only way you can have a first strike would be to have a bullet. You're not going to engage a bullet with a bullet. You want to take the person out. So if a guy's holding a gun, you want to be the first one to shoot. You look at United States Western movies, or you look at the Wild West in the United States. There are many people who are fast gun people who drew. And the only way to win is to shoot the other person before he shoots you. You can't shoot the bullet like a cartoon and stop the bullet like that. That's not going to work. You're going to have to get the person first. So it's a first strike option. I'm not suggesting it to be a good thing, but I'm saying that's how they're going to do self-defense. Self-defense by taking the person out.
Yeah, I'd just like to say, if we're referencing Indiana Jones movies, in the most recent Indiana Jones movie, someone pulled a gun out and then everyone else seemed to pull a gun out on him. So I don't know what kind of logic is going on. That seems more accurate to today's situation. I'd like to say your logic about you accusing us of using a circular argument doesn't really apply, seeing as what you're defending yourself against is a gun, and you defending yourself with a gun renders your whole argument useless, because if there was no gun for the person to shoot you with in the first place, what would they be shooting you with, and what would you have to defend yourself against? Exactly my point. I'm glad you brought it up. We are talking about legal guns. I'm talking about illegal guns that we have no idea from. So again, you say, okay, if you don't have something, we have to have something equal or better than. If we have something like that, we go back to that knife
and you have to recreate. And Kathleen Kennedy, the lady who was the head of the film studio, just got fired the other day because of her inability to attract the audience to that new Indiana Jones movie too. So I guess that proves a point here is that sometimes if you look weak, you can be attacked many times. And in this case, if you look to be strong or you stand up to people, then you will stop that. That's one way of stopping it. The other way of stopping is by definitely taking that person out. Now, when you have tremendous amount of gun violence, I think you have to look at society as well. I think you guys do a much better job or have done a much better job in the past with a lot less population of gun control. Plus you have security issues that we don't have here in the United States. You have massive identification with cameras that, you know, if something happens, you would know moments later, where we would have days or weeks or whatever. So there's a lot of things in England that you have that is, even though we speak the English language, or sometimes people think we speak English too. You guys actually speak English. You are doing much better than the United States in many of the areas.
Yeah, I would like to say sort of about you saying that you feel like your method to defend yourself would be to strike someone first. When I feel in danger, my first instinct is to call the police, because I have faith that the police will come here quickly. The person there won't have a gun and they won't shoot me. And if they do, the police will arrest them. And I don't feel threatened by the police, because in terms of my government, the priorities of my government lie with the safety of the people, as opposed to people getting what they want and being allowed to keep guns.
Okay, now let me ask you this question. I don't know where you live. Do you get to actually meet or interact with your police officers?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Okay, do you meet or interact? Do you know who your police officers are, your local police officers? Like if you lived in London, let's say, for example, and they would have a certain beat, you may actually know your police officers by name. Okay, be very comfortable. They have stations, and you may be a minute or two before they do. Here in the United States, we do not know our police officers as much. They ride around in cars. They don't really interact with people as much. And the response time is in between 20 minutes and 30 minutes. Well, that is not the same as it would be if you had a better relationship with the police officers. So I know what you're saying. I think it comes because of familiarity and maybe even respect for police officers that you have in England that aren't here. But there's a lot of people who feel very scared and do not feel confident in the police officers, especially with such high murder rates. They want to take it in their own hands. I'm just telling you, you know, try to be as truthful as I could to try to explain that to you. I'm not saying it's great. I'm just telling you it's the way it is.
Yeah. You know what you were saying about sort of like knowing the names of your police officers? We regularly have at our school, we regularly have one or two PCSOs, so like police support units, coming to school and do regular talks with us about, you know, safety, not gun violence, knife crime, things like that. And I think your idea of, you know, having a better relationship with the police, the idea that, you know, having a better relationship with the police sort of would prevent or help sort of prevent and decrease gun crime. It's just, I don't really think that that's sort of a plausible argument, because if you're arming your police and you're arming your people, if the police feel as though that there are people that they need to defend themselves against because they have guns and they can have guns and concealed firearms, then if you take away the guns from everyone, then you're protecting everyone. I mean, our police have tasers, which of course, you know, they are still a worthy sort of method of protection. Yes, we have armed support units where in necessary situations they can be called upon for support.
Yeah, I will say that if I speak to a police officer, if I talk to a police officer, or if I see someone who's being dealt with by a police officer, I see a taser on them and I think, yeah, so that person might be tasered and they may be incapacitated so that they can't cause people harm. What I don't see on a police officer is them holding a gun and think, oh, say if the situation escalated and the police officer had access to a gun, because obviously in America at the moment, I won't make a generalization, but there is an issue with police brutality in relation to guns and in relation to the weaponry that they have access to. And I understand that that is only a small portion of your police force, and I understand that the majority of your police is good, but I will say that if police brutality was happening on the same level that it was happening here, I would feel more confident in that the amount of damage they would be able to do would be less because of the amount of weaponry that they're given.
Yeah. Now, do your police officers carry around, have bulletproof vests and stuff like that as well, or no? So our police
officers do have stab-proof vests, but they have stab vests, but they don't have bulletproof vests just because they don't need them here because the majority of people don't have guns here.
Right, but I mean, they are worried about being stabbed, though, right? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, yeah.
That's true. We don't stab them back.
Yeah, I think the relationship with the police in the UK is very different to what it is in the US, purely based on the fact that they are just there to enforce the law. And I understand that. But I will say that if someone was getting arrested by the police, I'd be very surprised if they were, and if they were resisting to the police, the way that the police would deal with it would be very different. And if I saw someone resisting to the police, I wouldn't necessarily think, oh, they might get shot right now. I might think, oh, they might get tasered right now, but I don't think that person's life is in danger. And I don't think it can be said for the same.
Yeah, the way our police deal with it is more like, if they were to feel threatened by someone with a knife, they wouldn't then stab them back with a knife. Like the issue with guns, they would, like, the use of the taser is just to kind of get someone
Incapacitate someone.
Yeah, so that they're not a risk rather than actually getting them injured. Although obviously tasers can occasionally do that, it's way less likely.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think the thing about guns in the US is that I understand, and you've said this a lot, is that they're built into your culture. They are a part of, and I understand that's why you think that it's so hard to eradicate them. But I think the fact that they are built into your culture, the reason you're saying, oh, we aren't as advanced as the UK with security systems and things, that could easily be put in place. But the problem is that the weaponry that you're being given access to isn't able to be traced. The whole idea that if someone comes into your house, your first response is to shoot, but you know that they're going to have a gun, so you have to get your gun out. Like the whole idea of like shoot first and ask questions later just simply shouldn't apply to a household. Your household, if someone comes to your house, you should think, I will call the police will be here soon. I will be able to survive in this situation, or worst case scenario, or you might get injured, but you don't think I'm going to end someone's life because they've come into my house, or you don't think someone's going to end my life because they've came into my house.
And there was examples of that as well. I can't remember, wasn't that long ago where two young girls accidentally pulled onto the wrong driveway and went to go into their house, and so then the person whose house it was opened the door and shot them. Like the fact that they didn't even take into consideration the situation, that these people might need help, that these people might have made a mistake. Their first thought is to shoot. And the idea that there's no humility, there's no sort of humanity in that situation to protect and preserve life is just outrageous, because people have access, because people have, this sense of power when they hold a gun, and whether that be because they feel as though they need one, or just because that they've sort of grown up in a society in which guns and gun violence and the idea of carrying a gun to protect yourself is so sort of embedded within them that their first thought when someone knocks on their door or tries to open their door is to shoot them.
Can I also add
Yeah,
that with what she's said as the first thought was to shoot, that would add a very, firstly, morally incorrect and also a very hard impact on someone's mental health, knowing that they are ending a human life, that they are being given the opportunity to end a human life. That will have some repercussions on someone's mental and possibly physical health, depending on how they deal with the situation, dealing with the fact that they've just killed a human life because of maybe even a misunderstanding.
Storytelling, is it worth killing them?
Yeah, I think a lot of people's first response is like, for example, with robbers and with sort of people entering their houses and like with intruders and things like that, people think, I'll keep a gun by my bedside, I'll keep something next to me so I can defend myself. If someone was coming in to say steal a TV or a vase or something, that is an issue and the police should be called. But is that worth taking their life? Is that worth destroying a human life because you feel that it's your right because of a constitution that was written for a different time, for a different set of people, for a different world? Do you think that it's your God-given right, or it's your state-given right to say, I deserve to take someone's life because they've made me unhappy?
You bring up very valid points. The only issue would be is that according to the law, that's still permissible here in the States. So they would have to probably change, some laws up. And there's a lot of people that believe the same way you do. But when you think of United States, when it comes to this, what do you think our problems are?
Well, I think the issue is that a lot of the world views America as sort of just a paradox within itself, because how can someone with so many strict rules and regulations, how can one of the richest places in the world, how can somewhere with such advanced politics, how can such an advanced place take such a backward stance on something? How can somewhere so advanced and so with the potential to do so much for itself and for the rest of the world choose to adapt a stance that is killing people, that is taking lives daily, that is destroying the mental and physical health of this generation, the next generation, and is building a future for America that is going to end up in just a bloodbath? Because how can people stop this unless the government intervenes?
Yeah, see, I think that if you look at it that way, that you might want to define what the government is. If the government is of the people and the people are all messed up, then the government's going to be messed up as well. I don't know. I think the government is a reflection of the people. I don't know if we ever do what Australia did and outlaw it and go around the thing. That would be a very interesting topic to talk about, particularly in the case where I just don't know where we're at. We're in a different part of society here in the States right now. Go ahead, Trudy. Sorry, we didn't have more people. I don't know what happened.
Oh, I know. I think it's the last couple of times we've come across it, and we were kind of conscious of the fact a lot of your kids were on vacation as well, so we were aware of that. I'm very glad Stephanie made it. Please congratulate her.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Bearing in mind, she still pulled it out of the bag when she was on her way to work, so that was really good.
Yeah, I had a couple other people are working too, and they weren't able to. They were supposed to take a break, and they didn't. I guess they didn't get to take a break. So.
Yeah, but I mean, I think our students still got a lot out of it, even despite the fact that you had to take kind of hold of it all. So we really do appreciate it. And now we are going to be closed ourselves until September, but maybe we could kind of reconvene at some point in September.
Yeah.
And it can be a topic or a different one. We'll look at some others.
Okay, yeah, we got a couple of things that we're trying to do in the spring, or maybe in the fall. We want to try to look at U.S. foreign policy, and I think that'd be kind of good because the United States is such an insular country. We never look at ourselves how other people look at us. So I'd be real interested to see how you guys, especially when we talk about gun violence or anything like this, it would be interesting because it's always easier to fix somebody else's problems than it is to fix your own. you know how that is. All right,
thank you so much, though.
But
also, yeah, go on. Sorry.
And also, we haven't come up with a presidential election in about a year, and we'd like for you to pick a candidate for us, or whatever who you think is best and why. Something like that would be kind of fun.
I think that would be kind of fun as well. Yeah, I think we can pick a candidate for you. Yeah, we do that one, absolutely. So yeah, maybe
I'd love to do abortion.
Yes.
I'd love that. Yes. I would very much like to debate abortion.
Yeah, we've done that one before with them in a different group, but yeah, we could definitely do that. Yeah, so we'll put together a few ideas, and if you throw out a few ideas, I think that'd be really good for us. Thank you.
Sounds good. Right, y'all have nice vacation.
Yeah, we will. We've still got another week, but yeah.
Okay. Bye.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.